Hey guys, before the video begins I have an important announcement, which I'll say at the end of the video. Stick around if you want to hear it.
Mortis Media.
Summer camp. The blissful tranquility of the outdoors. Isolated, in a wooden cabin with your friends. What could go wrong? It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Number 1. I had a shitty summer. The kind of summer that makes you question what you're doing with your life, why you love the things you love, and how crummy the world can really be. And it's something I still feel uncomfortable about. I began working at a summer camp several years ago. I had history as a camper at this camp, and I loved the place. By the time I was 19, I had done what I had never imagined I'd do, and become the camp's one and only medic. As medic, I no longer hang out with counselors and other young staff as much. If I had free time, I spent it helping out in the kitchen. This year there was a big staff turnover. Our long-time cook moved on from camp, and no one was hired over the year as a replacement. So, come summertime, we were scrambling to find someone to cover the position. I met two of the interviewees, one a middle-aged woman who, in my humble opinion, seemed like the perfect, get-it-done kind of person who you need as a cook, and the other, a tall bald man, mid-40s, with piercings galore, and a loud, "Look at me" personality, looking at you, Mr. Meeseeks. The woman I fancied was not chosen. I think my boss was upset by her surprise when she saw how small our kitchen was. 2 ovens to feed 150 people. And the camp was introduced to our new cook, Chef Vincent. Everyone loved Chef Vincent, except for me. The instant I met him, I got chills down my spine. You know when you hear a strange sound in the dark, and your body is screaming at you to run or hide? That's how I felt every second I was in the meal hall or in the kitchen. Soon, the places that had been like a second home to me were feeling less comfortable, and more, get me the hell out of here creepy. Chef Vincent was abrasive. My first time speaking with him, he said something like, "That's your medic?" in response to my colour-dyed hair. He tried to be fancy, but his meals were dull and soggy. And after watching him prepare one, I stopped eating them altogether. I don't think the man had gone to school in his life, let alone taken a food safety course. I survived off an occasional bite of food on the table, and ate packaged crackers, bread, and things that he didn't handle directly, and a storage of cheap meal replacements and drinks in my room. It sucked. I am an extremely protective person, especially of my younger co-workers, who were basically family. Chef Vincent's kitchen staff was 16 or 17 years old, and I was afraid for them. I'd watch from outside the kitchen and talk to them, discreetly making sure that everything was okay. Honestly, at this point I was worried about being unfair, since everyone else loved him. Maybe I was the creep. But I couldn't get over the comments that he made and the way he spoke to me. He would touch my shoulder and stand all tall and leaning over me when he spoke to me, and told me about how his kids, and how they have to stay with their grandma now, and about how many years he had of experience, which I always suspected were due to being a prison cook or something like that. He was extremely arrogant. "It's not my fault I'm better than the old cook. I just am," he would say, and I wanted to punch him. But eventually, I just stopped going to the kitchen, and even stayed away from the mess hall unless others were in there with me. If he tried to talk to me, which he did, often at nights on the deck, I ignored him and left the room. But I still thought I was being a bitch, to be honest. Then, Chef Vincent told one of the kitchen staff to really molest that, in reference to stirring a pot or whatever. One member of the kitchen staff came crying to me about how much he was pushing them in the kitchen. Soon, all three of the kitchen staff were describing ingredients of complete disrespect. His refusal to learn their names, use of inappropriate words, and calling them his little girls, and calling the boy all sorts of names. This pushed me until I told the boss how uncomfortable it made me. I didn't bring the kitchen staff into it, since I advised them to tell their boss on their own. Then one day, a fellow member of staff came up to me and said that Chef Vincent said I won't stop following him, and that I should be dating him. Confused and angry, I followed up with another staff member who said that Chef Vincent was talking about the camp dog. Still concerned, I continued with my day when Chef Vincent called me out and told me the story, laughing with a hand on my shoulder the whole time. He also made vile sexual innuendos constantly. Oh yeah, I like things hot, and complimented me, more than inappropriately. I got chills every time. This had been going on for a week. In the second week, I'm asleep in the medic's cabin. It's got a bedroom separated from the rest of the office by an unlockable door, and I'm the only one who stays there. My nights are long, lots of sick campers and whatnot, and on this particular night, it's 4 AM, and I've finally gotten to bed after being up for an hour with a sick kid. I'm exhausted, and I'm asleep the second my head hits the pillow. 2 hours later, I'm awakened by a loud thumping at the door. Usually staff use the walkie-talkies to contact me, even at night, so I'm pretty concerned, and I crawl out of bed and head to the door. It's Chef Vincent. I hesitate, not wanting to open the door for him, so he hammers on it again. He looks angry. I'm angry. It's 6 AM. What does he want? Finally, I open the door just to crack and look out. He's loud. I have to do laundry. My office houses the washer and dryer for the camp, because I do laundry when kids wet the bed, so every morning laundry is reserved and staff need to ask me to use it. This particular week, we'd had water problems, and the laundry couldn't be done, so I had a lineup of camper things that needed to be washed. And he was here at 6 AM demanding he use the wash. When I pointed out the water issues and how camper stuff comes first, he got aggressive and yanked the door open. He's big and intimidating, and I stepped back to avoid him looking, and then he said, I am the important one here. I went cold. It was 6 AM. I had just been told by this creature from the depths that I, who worked at the camp for 5 years, was unimportant compared to him. It's hard to convey body language secondhand, but he was aggressive, to the degree that I flew past my usual responsive to this kind of situation, anger, and went straight to fearing for my safety. I can be an anxious person, but I don't get genuinely frightened by a lot of things. So what scared me more was how scared I was. My hair was on end, adrenaline pumping scared. His gaze was absolutely predatory. There was nothing about his presence that made me think he saw me other than something to be toyed with. At this point, my mouth was opening, and I knew I'd say something I regret saying, especially locked in the building alone with the one man who creeped the shit out of me from the second I met him. So I forced one word out. Okay, and backed away to my room. He watched me the whole time. I got to my room, and the tears pushed from my eyes. But I'm too tired for them to actually come. I am tired of this frustration, of this anger, of this fear. I warned my boss about him. Boss was always saying to listen to your gut. And I was. But did they do anything about it? No. I pushed a chair against the doorknob, not knowing if it actually works to lock doors like it does in the movies, and curled up in my bed. I told my boss the following morning, and they called it inappropriate and said that it wouldn't happen again. But that was all I heard. For the next week, I lived in constant anxiety, which meant puking a lot and hiding in my room. When he talked to me, he had a smile that would make even the most daft of people pause for concern. While before this, I had attempted to be polite. I always just left from then on. That week, all our staff were upstairs, save for a few staff monitoring the kids in their cabins. I was called over by a fellow upper-level staff member, who informed me that Chef Vincent was fired. His police check, which they didn't decide to do until after he was hired, came back. He didn't pass his vulnerable sector check, aka he was not allowed to work with or volunteer with kids in any capacity due to prior crimes, and I'll let you mull that over. Camp was effectively on lockdown whilst he was to vacate the premises. I lost it. The tears came and wouldn't stop, and I couldn't breathe. My whole body went fuzzy, and I was led out of the building by another upper-level staff member, where I managed to garble out some stuff, along with the lines of, "He'd made me so anxious, and no one else saw it. I'm just so relieved." The panic attack lasted for a solid 30 minutes. When I saw him exit the building with his belonging, I hid in my office. And when I came out, he was gone. They kept it all under wraps. They didn't tell the kids that the cook had gone. They didn't tell the parents just in case something had happened. My boss didn't even tell the board of directors. It was a huge liability, and it still is. And whilst I'm glad that my anxieties about the man were completely justified, I am filled with anger over the fact that he was hired without a criminal record check, and the fact that my feelings were repeatedly dismissed. Camp went from being the only place in the world where I felt completely safe and comfortable, to a strange place where I felt I was living a never-ending nightmare. I felt inadequate and constantly upset. It's funny how having your fears ignored can make you feel as if there's something wrong with you. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore and quit on account of my mental health, so I could see a professional more often. I still have fears about the man finding me, which I feel is irrational because he never actually abused me or anything, just made me feel like shit with myself, and made me feel anxious, and was incredibly aggressive and over-sexual. My parents joked about it being a Cape Fear kind of situation, and laughing about it makes it feel better, but only for a little bit. I don't think they realised just how terrified I was, and still am. So creepy chef, with a criminal record and predatory eyes, who decided to spend his summer working at a kids camp, let's not meet again. A few years ago, I worked at a Jewish summer camp in northern Georgia. As many of you may know, Georgia is a fairly conservative state, as well as being predominantly Christian. There are a small number of Jewish communities and a few summer camps. I'd say that this summer camp was more culturally Jewish than it was religious. There were no religious requirements, nor specific religious focus. Rather, it was a place for kids who were often in the minority to come to a camp that allowed them to meet some kids like them. Staff came from all over. We had many Australians, a lot of British people, and a few Israelis, and people from various areas of the US. Each night at around 10, most of the staff were able to go out on the town for a couple of hours, whilst enough staff remained behind to watch over the cabins. This particular night, a group of about 5 of us decided to go to a local bar to grab a few beers. It had been a hot day and was extremely humid that night. Generally, we were extremely well received by the community. Despite differences, we brought in lots of revenue for the town during the summer months. We bought supplies at the local Walmart and often took the campers on tubing trips, or occasionally out to dinner after a long hike on the Appalachian Trail. It was midsummer, so we'd been out to the bars in the area many times already that season. The 5 of us sat around a table drinking and discussing the events of the day, as fellow employees typically would after work. About 30 minutes in, a white man in his 20s comes up to our table. I distinctly remember a jagged scar on his cheek, but didn't think much of it at the time. He introduced himself and told us that he was having a party that night at his place. He said black, white, gay, straight, don't care, just come. I found it odd that he'd open his speech with a disclaimer. Of course, the party should be open for everyone. Why did he feel the need to specify? But we'd all had a few beers and were feeling pretty loose. He talked for a bit longer, and nothing really seemed off. We told him we were working at the camp in the local area and couldn't stay, and that we would probably be heading back soon. An hour later, our group went out to the parking lot to get into the car. As we approached it, we saw the same guy come out of the shadows. He had a buddy with him, with a shaved head. His expression was incredibly hateful. His eyes had changed. He pounded his fist into his hand, and then took off his shirt and revealed a poorly inked SS tattoo. My stomach dropped. One of the bigger guys in my group, Kevin, immediately reacted by pulling out a knife from his back pocket. At summer camp, most of us staff carried knives because we spent a lot of time building campfires, etc. We asked what they wanted. The original guy started shouting some anti-Semitic remarks and told us he was going to beat us down. Kevin started walking towards the 2 guys, but we pulled him back. He told us his buddies were on his way, and sure enough, some more guys started walking into the parking lot. It's all kind of blurry here. I remember jumping into one of the cars, pulling Kevin in with us, and it felt like we were surrounded. There were probably only about 7 or 8 of them. Rocks were thrown at the car, and we sped off. My heart was beating like crazy, and we never went back to that bar. On the bright side, when we told the story to the competing bar in town, the bartender lined up 6 shots, cheersed us, and said that we'd always be welcome in his bar and in that town. Had no problems in the town itself, but when I took some campers on a 2-day hike up the Appalachian Trail, it was another story. Number 3. This summer started off with a trip to a very prestigious university for what is basically nerd camp. Most people were actually very lovely, except for a handful of rather strange, sex-starved, or just plain socially awkward individuals who made comments that would send chills down almost anyone's spine. For example, one boy made a comment about how we really shouldn't have any qualms about secretly injecting people's water supply with numerous biological chemicals as a means of testing what is suitable for biological warfare. Another brought a roll of what looked like 10,000 condoms and eagerly showed my roommate and I in a coffee shop with the biggest grin on his face. One of my 3 roommates also had a particular habit of waking up in the wee hours of the morning, getting dressed, hopping back to bed, and then darting out the door without even a hello as soon as any of us had woken up. The only real physical issues I had were at the final dance when us biochemical kids were introduced to the engineers. I hate to bag on them, since most of my brother's friends, including his wife, are engineers. But these kids were ridiculously creepy. I was followed the whole night by one kid who kept trying to teach me how to feel the beat in my veins, and had my wrists grabbed by other kids I met on the first day. This isn't even the worst of it. I have yet to introduce Brett. Brett was what my roommates and I described as the dictionary definition of a tall douchebag upon first impressions. He stuck out like a sore thumb amongst a sea of acne-ridden teens with oversized glasses and pants that were too big for their belts. He came from money, unlike most of us, and liked to let everyone know how superior he was to everyone. He sat alone on all the bus rides, and until my roommate and I finally approached him, he only mingled with his fellow Pennsylvanians. He liked to brag about how long it would take him to get ready, and he probably spent more time on his hair than any girl he knew. He was ridiculously good looking, and he knew it. On one particular bus ride, the two of us managed to be stuck together when we got on late. His response was rude. "Man, I don't know if I can do this." I read silently next to him as he scrolled through his Instagram pics. Glancing over, I saw him with another girl in formal attire, most likely for a dance. I saw this as an opportunity to initiate small talk and asked if he had a girlfriend. "Nah, none of those are really my dates." He showed me his Facebook pictures of him with other girls in other fancy outfits. There were close to a dozen, and to be honest, I hated all of these girls. He then showed me some pictures of him at concerts, parties, and other random places, all with a different girl by his side. "They're so dumb," he continued. "I know they're like me, but I just hate them all. I usually take them out when I'm bored and we get hammered and hook up, but that's it. I could never date any of them. Hell, I can't even hook up when I'm sober." I was past the point of being slightly uncomfortable. The way he spoke about these girls was beyond messed up. He described several hooking ups in very intricate details and referred to the girls as though they were pieces of meat. Then the real crazy talk began. "I like to take these girls out to parties and get them super drunk. I take care of them at first, help them to their bathroom, hold their hair back when they throw up. Then I like to pull them back and shove them in their vomit, kick their face in, spit on them, and tell them to go kill themselves. These girls, you know, they're so dumb." If I hadn't been so shocked by the words he just said, I probably would have said something like, "What's wrong with you, you disgusting piece of shit?" But all I could respond with was a stare equally as emotionless as his. I think he found that intriguing, maybe a little comforting, maybe a little attractive, because the rest of his trip was spent in my presence. He would often talk to me about how I was different, how I wasn't like other girls, how I didn't give a shit just like him. He would tell me his stories about belittling and dehumanizing women, as though I admired them. To be honest, I didn't say much because I didn't even know how to respond. He was a maniac, and he really got off on treating girls like shit. We had the strangest level of friendship because I was so disgusted with him, and at the same time he was an attractive person. He was extremely charismatic and had a great sense of humor, and was extremely intelligent. But there was something off about him, and it was only because of what he had disclosed with me that I felt I was able to pick up on it. His eyes, piercing blue, were so empty and cold. When talking about personal topics or tragic events, he never missed a beat, with a sympathetic reply, but it was so disingenuous. I discussed the topic with my roommates, and we came to the conclusion that Brett was a sociopath, a narcissistic sadist, or some other type of psychopath, and with no matter how attractive, we should all stay away. After the camp ended, I never thought I would see him again, and he would simply be a creepy story to tell my friends. However, that was not the case. My final trip of the summer, you better believe it, was to accompany my best friend Pamela on her annual trip to visit her dad in Pennsylvania. Somewhere in those wooded forests lurked a monster by the name of Brett. I had no intention of meeting up with him, but I did plan on meeting up with one of his friends, Drew. We had hit it off during camp, sharing many of the same interests and hobbies. He told me that before we left, if I were ever in Pennsylvania or DC, I should let him know, and he would be more than happy to meet up. Although he and Brett hung out at camp, I knew that they weren't friends back home. They were far too different. Drew was a freckly, paper-white ginger who was about 5'10" and about 135 pounds at most. He played video games and hiked for fun. Not to mention Brett specifically told me that he hated Drew. Apparently, Brett believed Drew was trying way too hard to be like him, and this was most definitely untrue. So Drew, Pamela and I go hiking around his town. I don't ask about Brett when Drew mentions him, but my best friend is dying to meet him after everything I told her. Drew says he can invite us to a party, and then we can all catch up. We ended up going, since apparently Pamela thought spending the night making venison jerky wasn't a preferable alternative to meeting up with a crazed individual. The party ends up being something out of a nightmare. Raging college kids and a shit ton of drugs. All the stuff that would make me want to hide in a corner. Pamela was having a blast, and so far I imagined to avoid consuming any of the drinks Brett was shoving in my hand. He was staying way too close to me the whole night, trying to pull me onto him when we sat on couches, grazing my ass whenever I stood near him, and at one point he pressed against the wall and forcibly kissed my neck, before his not date came around and got very pissy with the both of us. I hid from him for the rest of the night. Eventually, the party began breaking up, because someone got wind that the cops were coming. Drew was rushing me to the car, but I couldn't find Pamela anywhere. I looked in the bathroom and found Pamela flipping her shit and dragging me to the tub. There in the tub was Brett State. She was surrounded by vomit, and her face and lips were palish blue. The both of us began freaking out because she wasn't breathing. I called Drew, and he raced into the house, and the three of us dragged her out the front and called an ambulance. Drew was pretty stoned, but told us to wait in the car, and he would explain everything to the cops since he didn't want to get us in trouble. The cops came and questioned everyone at the scene. The girl was taken away, and Pamela ended up having to call her dad to pick us up. The next day I called Drew, and he told me the girl was alright. She had also spoken to Brett, who seemed completely unfazed by everything. Apparently, she passed out whilst they were fooling around in the basement, so we took the liberty of dumping her in the bathtub where he knew someone would find her, since she was his friend. Then he split, because he didn't want to get into any trouble for drinking underage. I know the world is a pretty messed up place, and people can be downright evil, but to witness this firsthand is rather nauseating. Brett is only 18, and it terrifies me to think about what he's capable of. Imagine in a few years. So I truly hope I never have to look into your soulless eyes again. Please, let's not meet. Number 4. When I was 12 years old, I went to a week-long scout camping trip with my troop. Our campsite was notably isolated from the majority of the other sites. So even though there were hundreds of kids at the camp overall, there were probably 5 or 6 of us and 2 or 3 leaders in our site. I shared a tent with 2 other kids. Being the anti-scout that I was, I bought a full-sized cot to sleep on, whilst the other kids slept on the ground. I am a horrible sleeper in any conditions other than my own bed, so I've always taken sleeping pills when I go camping. Sometimes I have strange reactions to them, where I don't sleep well and get dreams confused with reality. On our final night at camp, it was storming with lightning everywhere. We were in a creeped out mood, telling scary stories before we went to sleep. I couldn't wait to go home next morning. I took my pills and somehow managed to fall asleep. I woke up a few hours into the night. I could barely make out the crouched over figure of a tall man. I'd woken up because he was gently grabbing my leg. He didn't look like any of my leaders from what I can tell. Confused, groggy, and horrified, I said, "What?" The figure remained silent. After a week on these sleeping pills, I knew that they could make me confused. I closed my eyes, hoping it was just the pills combined with the night of scary stories. I felt the gentle grip on my leg again. The figure was standing there. "What?" I said again, and this time more panicked. Suddenly, still without a word, the man leaned down on the ground next to me where I couldn't see him because I was elevated. I couldn't hear anything strange happening, but I was filled with so much terror that I couldn't even bring myself to peek over the edge of my cot. I was still unbelievably tired and confused, and in my frightened stupor, I convinced myself that the sleeping pills were causing me to blend nightmares with reality. I drifted in and out of a horrified semi-sleep for the rest of the night, wondering what exactly had happened. I never recalled hearing anything notable or seeing the man leave the tent, and once the sun began to dimly light the tent, I mustered the courage to look over the edge of the cot. The kid next to me was asleep and appeared unharmed. If this were all the story though, I would have dismissed it as a weird reaction to my sleeping pills. But then the next morning over breakfast, the kid who had been next to me asked me if our other tent mate, if someone had gone into our tent overnight. The other tent mate said he assumed one of us was getting up to pee and had gone back to sleep. When we all confirmed that none of us had gotten up in the night, we started freaking out, begging our leaders and the other scouts for them to admit if one of them had played a joke on us, or that they had a history of sleepwalking. Nobody had any idea what we were talking about. I don't know what someone's motives would have been to come into our tent and to gently touch my leg and be silent, unless I have some serious mental blocks. There was no kind of sexual violation that I can recall, just a strange, quiet intruder. Number 5. I am originally from India. My parents sent my sisters and I to an Indian summer camp so that we could learn more about our culture. At the time, I was around 14. I was the standard young and cute kid. I had been going to this camp for a couple of summers, and this particular summer was an important one. The teachers were extremely excited because they had a yoga guru of some sort visiting. I think he was around 60. He would teach us traditional music and dance. He started noticing me right away and kept making comments about how well I was doing things. As the summer continued, I would frequently find him watching me and talking to the teachers about me. Whenever he fixed my pose, he would linger a little too long. These things kept happening, and I started to become aware, very aware, of his presence. Flash to the end of the camp, and it was a couple of days before the ending ceremony. A few girls ran up to me and said that he had candy in his room, as he was staying at the camp. They said he would give me some if I went up. I really had a craving for sugar, but I didn't feel comfortable going alone, so I had a few girls come with me. He gave them candy right away, and they left. When I asked for some for me, he motioned for me to come inside his room. I shook my head. He kept trying to get me inside his room. Finally, he gave up after I wouldn't budge, and asked for a kiss in exchange for the candy. Something inside my mind told me to run, and I started backing away and booked it. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I just knew something in that situation wasn't right. I think I told my parents, but never went back to that camp again. In hindsight, it's quite terrifying to think, if I'd have wanted that sugar bad enough, would I have gone to his room? And what would have happened next? Regardless, creepy pedo, let's not meet again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. So, I said I had an important announcement, and here it is. You may already be aware of it if you read the comment section of yesterday's video, but if not, here it is. So you may be wondering why the other day, I think 2 days ago now, I didn't upload a video. That was because on that evening, I was hit pretty bad by the demonetization bot here on YouTube. 119 videos of mine. Think about that. 119. That's under half of all my videos were hit in the first wave of demonetization. And every so often they demonetize a few more. So as you can imagine, I was quite upset. Half my videos basically being demonetized in an instant. I stayed up until about 2 AM trying to find a solution. But so far, there isn't anything apparent. The rule is if a demonetized video gets 1,000 views in 7 days, it won't be considered. Which is extremely unlikely for any video that I made over a week ago. Meaning that about 115 videos right now, and probably more by the time you hear this, are demonetized forever. And will no longer be re-evaluated by YouTube to maybe get them monetized again. So things are looking quite bleak. I've contacted YouTube support, but they just send me really unhelpful emails. Templated emails, nothing useful. Just to give you an example, yesterday's video took a while because after it was uploaded, it was instantly demonetized. So I had to wait for them to evaluate it before I could upload it. It took them about 20 hours and then they said it was fine because my videos are fine, I don't breach any rules or terms of service. But the thing is, their bot, once it's actually been uploaded, once it's been published, can actually revoke monetization again a second time, which of course is very frustrating for any creator. So I just wanted to let you guys know this situation. I'm not going to stop uploading. I should still be going daily. It might be a bit shaky for a few days because I'd like to have them reviewed for monetization before I publish, just so that I can keep making a living from this. But yeah, just wanted you guys to know what's going on. Right now, I'm gonna just hope for the best and see what happens. And thanks for sticking by me, it really helps. If you're wondering how you can help me, just liking and commenting on videos is plenty. Just please keep doing that, sharing them. That's brilliant. I really am grateful for that. So yeah, I'll keep you guys updated if anything changes. Maybe some kind of divine miracle happens and all of them get reapproved, but probably not. Thanks guys. I'll see you in the next one.